Good morning and welcome to another edition of Sharp Takes. I'm delighted today to have as our guest the new representative from Addison 4, that's Bristol, Lincoln, Starksboro, and Moncton, Representative Herb Olson. Herb served in the legislature as a lawyer in the Ledge Council for a number of years, focusing on healthcare issues. Also worked in BISHCA, was called at the time, about healthcare regulation in Vermont and also in other states. So his knowledge is focused around that, his past knowledge, and more recently has been involved in education issues at the Starksboro Elementary School. So welcome, Herb. It's delightful to have you on the program.
Well, it's great to be here, Dave.
That's great.
Thanks very much for inviting me.
And a lot has changed in the last week. You know, the temperature's risen, the sap is flowing, most of the school budgets have passed. Voters, school boards and superintendents got the message from voters that tax rates were too high and they cut spending. So now the message out of the governor's office is not about taxes, it's about that our test scores aren't high enough, which would sort of imply giving more resources to schools. So I'm confused. Where do you think we are now, and where might we be headed?
So it's been a really interesting year, especially for a new legislator here. You said I was on the legislative council for a long time, so that sort of gave me the physical map of the legislature and the procedures. But navigating the real role of policy making is real distant, and it's been a real eye opener. Education is front and center. And it certainly, a lot of the discussion has been around financing and taxes to begin with. And also, lots of other contentious issues, tuition, things like that. So I guess I hear from you that the governor is shifting things a little bit. But the underlying plan, as I understand it, is still the same. And his focus, at least in the materials that I've seen, still revolve around changing the way we tax ourselves, moving to a foundation formula, consolidating school districts into 5 mega districts. It might be a little bit less over time, but still huge districts. At the beginning of the session, those were supposed to be the things that would reduce some costs and therefore lower taxes. I've been a little skeptical about whether the numbers match. Yeah. Having to do this is set under the foundation formula, as you know, there's a set amount that all schools would get, roughly set amount that all schools would get, and then you could tax yourself beyond that. The questions for me on that have been, is that base amount going to be adequate to support education? And then is the extra increment going to be consistent with our values around equal educational opportunity?
Yeah, those
and
are good questions.
I don't have all the information maybe other legislators do, but I haven't seen the detail that would suggest that that's necessarily going to happen. And I think that relates to what you're seeing as a shift. If the shift is, we want to change the system in order to increase our proficiency scores, well, the same issues are really involved, right? So in a foundation formula, if you've got a set amount that basically schools are going to have to live with in terms of educating their students, is it enough, right?
Yeah.
Is it enough? And if you don't have it enough, how are you going to increase proficiency scores and things like that? Maybe there's some good answers to that. I just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I think it might be a little short-sighted to think that because all these budgets passed, that we're somehow in the clear and everybody's happy. My understanding is that the last session, there was an infusion of considerable millions of dollars to reduce tax rates. And I think some of it is like, I think people are saying school boards reducing their budgets. Good thing. That's a good thing. But some of it probably had to do with that extra money that was being provided one-time basis, I think. And is that going to be there this coming year? Who knows? Probably. I don't know. Who knows? Yeah. So just because folks think that, well, most of the budget's passed and then we're out in the clear, I think that's a little short-sighted.
Yeah. So let's also consider that. So let's say we weathered this financial crisis, and somehow or other the legislature figures out a way to deliver adequate money to schools. Okay. Don't we still have concerns? Ripton, for example, has 3 students in their kindergarten. Can you actually run a school like that? And then high schools are having trouble keeping programming like AP Calc or something like that. Absolutely. And we know that we don't have, we're still not training people in the trades, electricians and nurses and healthcare professionals and in our technical centers. So don't we still have some issues?
Oh, I think we have big issues. I think it's important, though, you mentioned the elementary schools, right? And the high schools and career technical centers like Hannaford, right? Yeah. They each have important considerations, some of which dovetail to each other, and some of them I think just don't. I think the issues around elementary schools are very different from the issues around high school. With high school, I think some of the smaller high schools really have difficulty offering the kind of curriculum that parents and students really expect at that age of their education. They're looking to acquire skills, trying to go to college, those that want to go to college. And they're really looking for more than what sometimes a smaller high school can provide. In that kind of context, I think it's a terrific idea to try to do some collaboration, consolidation around the high schools to offer a better educational opportunity. And at the same time, reduce the number of superintendents, business managers. That's a good thing, too. Elementary schools, I think, are a little bit different. There's this narrative out there that smaller schools, primarily in rural areas, right, don't offer a good education and cost too darn much, right? I think that's a false narrative. It's being pushed by a lot of folks over in Montpelier. I call them the usual suspects. Mm-hmm. The folks that come from various associations and they lobby, the committees, and they don't like small schools. I think they're looking at it I think there's a lot of misinformation around that. You point to Ripton. I think there are definitely some schools that might not be viable over the long term, mainly because, like you say, three students in the class doesn't cut it either from an educational standpoint nor from a financial standpoint. But most of these schools aren't like that. They may be small. But they can do things to make sure they provide a good education. Many of them provide a great education. And they can do some things to be cost effective. For example, in Robinson, in Starksboro, just this past year, we had a bit of an enrollment crunch around some of the grade levels. So we had multi-age classrooms for the next school year. That's a reasonable response. Makes it cost effective. So my point would be, not all elementary schools are the same.
Yeah.
All right. And what I think is needed, and I'm having there's some tough time, trying to combat that false narrative, I think. But I think what we needed is to take a look at each elementary school on a case-by-case basis, give people a fair process, fair standards. Many of those schools, I think, are going to make the cut. Some of those schools might not.
So who does that? I think the governor's proposal moves most of the authority for running schools in the state into the State Agency of Education. Is that going to work?
On this particular issue, I don't think so. In the legislative proposal that I saw, actually, Dave, they change a lot of things. They're going to consolidate all these districts, in the process of which they would, I would think, wipe out a lot of those articles of agreement that would require a vote, that kind of thing, before you close a school. So they're authorizing, and they keep the underlying statutory language, which I think says, okay, these mega school districts are going to make a decision about whether to close all these elementary schools. That isn't a fair process to me. Yeah. You absolutely need to have some relationship of trust between leaders, educational leaders, whether they're at a district level, at the state level. You need that trust between those leaders and their communities. Otherwise, you get tax revolts, right? You don't have that connection. There's no trust. So I would not think that would be a good way to just, you need to add some gloss to that. You need fair process. You need fair standards to judge elementary schools before they're closed.
Yeah. But who does that judging?
Good question. I'm a lawyer. I confess I'm a lawyer. And I put a lot of faith, despite what's going on the national level, I put a lot of faith in the rule of law.
In what?
In the rule of law.
Oh, okay.
And I think that if you create a legal structure where whoever makes the decision is obligated to follow certain standards that are perceived as fair, and they do it in a fair manner, I think people will trust that. I think people can accept that.
Yeah.
So it almost doesn't matter who makes that decision, whether it's one of these mega districts. The mega district is really doesn't help trust at all. But let's say it's at an Addison County district, for example. I could envision creating a legal structure so that whoever makes the decision does so fairly, through a fair process, Administrative Procedure Act, something like that, have some articulated standards in the statute, and maybe an appeal process. If you had that, even if a school is closed, at the very least you have a community saying, well, I was given a fair shake.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. Now, are those standards already in place, or do we need to create these standards?
I think they would have to be enacted into law.
Yeah.
I have some suggestions, though.
All right.
I introduced a bill, H-180, and it tries to set out those kinds of standards in a fair process. It would call on the school district to do a real good financial and educational evaluation into a particular school. Metrics, proficiency metrics would be, I think, on the table. Metrics like, well, if you had to close a school, how far would the kids be transported? That would be a standard. Cost effectiveness, are they doing things? Are they making the most out of the money? And what's the bigger impact on the social impact, I guess, on some of these towns, especially those way out in the hinterlands, from losing their school? Well, and if you did that, apply those standards, have the decision maker be obligated to follow a fair process. That's kind of what it calls for.
So you mentioned social level, and you applied it to the community. When you first brought it up, I'm thinking about the social interaction of the kids, the students. Yeah. And I think that kind of the default, because we don't have a good handle on other measurements, the default is test scores. So we then say, okay, all the kids in a particular school, if 70% of them are not proficient in third grade, then we close the school. I think that's going to be, the default, if you will. And how do you get away from that? I mean, it seems to me that the social interaction and the problem solving and a lot of other things besides test scores are indications of what kids' learning is and what kind of quality school you have.
And what kind of student they are and how they're going to grow up to be good citizens in our society.
Yeah.
Really important. There are metrics, I think. around social, emotional health, I think are important. So I think you could construct some metrics around that, so that you don't just leave it for proficiency scores and things like that, which are a good measure. I mean,
They're
but they
important.
shouldn't
I'm
be.
not trying to.
There shouldn't be the only measure.
Right.
That would be what I would say.
That's my point. Yeah.
I think it's a good point.
Yeah. So, how do we get from where we are to where you think we ought to be?
Well, I'm skeptical. I'm a new legislator, so of course I know more than anyone else there. It was not true. But I do try to reach out and think about what people that maybe I don't disagree with them. Maybe I don't agree with them on all things. Where are the little pieces where, maybe there's an opportunity for discussion? And I would say that the governor's proposal, regardless of some of the particulars, had a really important core nugget, if you will, in his original plan. And he said he wants to have smaller schools judged based on their educational value and financial viability. Those are two good core principles, I think. Yeah. Okay. Now, then he went on to, threshold enrollment sizes, but I'll forget about that I'm not real thrilled about, and focus on, educational value and cost effectiveness. Those seem like good things, to judge an elementary school about. And, I'm trying to reach out to them and say, hey, go with that one. That makes some sense.
Good enough, I think. What do we do with structure, though? How big should our school districts be? I know that at least one of the consultants that the state was using to develop this proposal said the ideal school district was about 3,900 students. The proposal the governor brought forward calls for this district that we're sitting in to be 34 or 35,000 students. It's a 10 times issue. What do you think was the appropriate size, and how do we get there? How do we design these things?
So, Dave, I've been reading the reports of some of these experts for quite a little while. And the problem, I don't denigrate their expertise at all, but I think one of the problems is that they're based on circumstances that aren't really all that similar to Vermont's. They include urban areas, they include lots of different areas. I get back to the issue around how do you maintain, and in some cases I think we need to rebuild the relationship of trust between leaders and the community. God bless the folks in northern Franklin County, but I don't think they know a whole lot about what we're doing down here. And I think it's really hard to fashion that kind of relationship of trust when you have such disparate types of communities. So maybe you should think about different size thresholds, or take that into consideration. Fine, your optimal district size is, I can't remember what you said, 2,500?
39. Close to 4,000 you could use for a round number.
Well, take that as a starting point, not the end point. And think about how you also achieve other important goals, such as maintaining a relationship of trust. I'll give a shout out to something you've been talking about in terms of, how you look at that. And as I understand it, Dave, you can describe it better than I, but it would involve thinking about, some sort of Addison County entity where you have at least more community, more sense of community in the county as it is. You could, I think, achieve some good administrative cost savings in that side without not destroying, but reducing the level of trust and relationship between leaders and communities. That's a good thing. The other nice thing that I was reading about your proposal, which I think you've presented to education committees. Good for you. Has to do with incorporating career technical education into that kind of system. I think for too long, the tech ed part of our educational system has been kind of the forgotten component, the forgotten stepchild of our educational system. It's really, really important. And a lot of the reports I'm reading and the people I talk to at Hannaford and other places, there's just a lot of tension, unnecessary tension between high schools and career technical education centers. And it's, I think, because there aren't the structures to really foster collaboration and integration. And I think your notion of incorporating the career technical education administration within, some countywide district, I think has a lot of promise. And of course, the other aspect is leave the elementary schools alone. They're doing a good job by and large. Why muck up the whole thing? Why muck up this effort to really improve how we're financing and delivering education services with something that I don't think is necessary and might very well sink, any eventual proposal.
Yeah, it seems to me that there are enough rural legislators that if you lean too hard on the rural areas in the state, you're not going to get a bill passed. I mean, politics is really the art of the possible, yeah. And even though something might be the perfect ideal out there, if you can't generate the votes on the House floor or in the governor's office, for that matter, you're not going to get it done.
Pick your battles, right?
Yeah.
It sort of, not to go back into history, although it can be useful to think about history. We had an effort a few years ago to try to get some cost savings around collaboration in administration and, try to offer better curriculum to the high school students in Virgins and Mount A, which I'm glad to hear is starting up again a little bit. I think it was sunk because people wanted to, at the same time, close a lot of good performing elementary schools.
Yeah.
Too bad.
Yeah, I think the efforts at the high school level, I think that we, Act 46, in hindsight, what we did was we created this tension between primary education and secondary education. Yeah. And the school districts in Addison County, anyway, in trying to maintain performance and programs at the high school level, could only look one place, and that was costs at the elementary school level. So that created the notion that we had to close some elementary schools. I think that if the finances for high schools were somehow separated from the finances for elementary schools, then and somehow dissipate or eliminate that tension between primary education and secondary education, superintendents and school boards will be enabled to make good decisions for their students.
I think you make a good point. I heard a lot of that a few years ago when we were going through those controversies.
Great. So not quite sure where to go from here. We're going to create districts, I would say, around the tech centers in the state. And that would lead us to 17 school districts. And I think realistically, you would need 3 or 4 districts in addition to that because of the geography around tech centers. So we end up with 20 plus or minus high school districts focused on tech centers. That seems to me to be promising. I don't know whether it has the inertia, can overcome inertia at the legislative level, and just how much notion, especially with, okay, so now school districts have solved the tax problem. Why do anything?
Oh, school system. Oh, you mean the recent budgets, you mean?
Yeah, they passed overwhelmingly.
Well, okay, so again, I'll go back to a couple of points there. I think people are being a little premature around that. I think there was an infusion of money. I think school districts made a concerted effort to try to cut costs as much as they could. How long is that going to last, right? If you don't have that infusion of money next year, well, the tax rates are going to go up, right? And if some of the student needs aren't going to go away, so what are you going to do next time when the taxes, go up again? I hope they don't, but I could see that happening. So I think it's a little short-sighted. Of course, lots of folks are in the short-sighted business, and we'll see. We'll see. I would hope for some serious look at the underlying costs, and I don't think people have really paid attention to that.
And what do you mean by underlying costs?
We got how many billion is it? It's over $2 billion, I think, in education fund spending. That's a lot of money.
Yes, it is.
It's expensive to provide education to our students, right? But the way our system is set up right now, I mean, in state government, for example, every year there's an appropriations bill. And that bill is combed through with a fine-tooth comb. And people look at, is this expense really necessary? Is it the right level? Should it be higher? Should it be lower? Is this the right way to pay for it, right? Should it come out of the general fund? Should it come out of a special fund? And that's all a good thing, I think. That's what a legislature, public representatives are all about. Are your tax dollars being used in the manner that you think reflects our values and is sufficient to support the programs you think
And you think school boards didn't do that this last time?
Boards cannot do that. I don't think that school boards at the local level, I've been in there, I don't think they have the ability at the local level to do that kind of comprehensive, in-depth analysis of spending. There's all sorts of information out there. Every year, school boards report to the state, in depth, category by category, what they're spending. I don't think anything's ever done with that. It's
at the state level.
At the state level.
Yeah.
In fact, I think the Agency of Education says, well, we don't have the staff to really look at that.
I think staffing at the agency has been a problem for a long period of time.
So if the locals really don't have the expertise to do it, if the Agency of Education, somebody's got to look at it.
Yeah.
And I've been urging, the legislature to say, give that budget the same kind of scrutiny you give to the annual appropriations bill. I don't know how that would work out, but I think it would be a healthy exercise.
Oh, interesting. Well, once again, a half an hour has rushed by. I want to thank you very much for stopping by and sharing your thoughts.
Well, I appreciate it, Dave.
Yeah. And thank you once again for taking the time to watch this interview with Representative Herb Olson and a little bit of what's going on in the legislature.